The California sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink as Keanu Reeves drove his beloved 1973 Porsche 911 along the winding coastal highway. He'd spent the last 14 hours on set, filming intense action sequences for his latest movie. His body ached, but the drive always cleared his mind. The purr of the engine and the freedom of the open road were his therapy after long days of being in character. The vintage Porsche had been with Keanu for years. It wasn't about showing off wealth or status. It was about connection. This car represented craftsmanship from an era when things were built to last, to be repaired rather than replaced. Keanu understood this philosophy. It mirrored his own approach to life and career. The car's engine made a sound Keanu had never heard before. A sharp clicking followed by a whine that grew louder with each passing moment. He frowned, gently easing off the gas. The road ahead curved away from the busy highways and tourist spots of Los Angeles, leading toward smaller towns that dotted the California coastline. "Come on, old friend," Keanu murmured, patting the dashboard like it was a tired horse. Just a little farther, but the Porsche had other plans. The engine sputtered once, twice, and then went silent. Using the car's momentum, Keanu guided it to the shoulder of the road, the wheels crunching on gravel as it rolled to a stop. He sat for a moment in the sudden silence, running a hand through his dark hair. Stepping out, Keanu lifted the rear hood and stared at the engine. Despite owning the car for years, his knowledge of what lay beneath the metal was limited to the basics. He knew enough to check the oil and refill the windshield wiper fluid, but diagnosing an engine problem was beyond his skills. Pulling out his phone, he discovered he had only one bar of service, enough to make a call but not enough to use any location apps. He dialed his assistant, briefly explained the situation, and asked for help finding a nearby mechanic. "You're near Pine Grove," his assistant told him after looking up his location. "It's a small town about 3 miles ahead. There's only one garage there according to the reviews. Place called Miller's Auto Shop. I can call them for you?" "No need," Keanu replied. "I'll call them myself, thanks." After getting the number, he called the garage. A gruff voice answered on the 4th ring. "Miller's Auto. Hello, my car broke down on Highway 1 about 3 miles south of Pine Grove. I was wondering if you could help. Got a tow truck. Costs $75 to bring it in. Shop closes in an hour." "That would be great, thank you." "What's the car?" "A 1973 Porsche 911. There was a pause on the line. "German engineering. All right, I'll be there in 20. "Look for a blue tow truck." The line went dead before Keanu could respond. He smiled slightly at the brief conversation, appreciating the no-nonsense approach. While waiting, he leaned against the car, taking in the scenery. The sun had nearly disappeared below the horizon, and the first stars were becoming visible in the darkening sky. True to his word, an old blue tow truck rumbled up the highway exactly 20 minutes later. It was a vintage model itself, possibly from the 1980s, well-maintained but showing its age in the faded paint and minor dents along the side. The driver who stepped out matched the truck perfectly. He was tall and lean, with a head of thick white hair and a face weathered by years in the sun. Deep lines around his eyes suggested decades of squinting at engine parts. He wore faded blue overalls with Frank embroidered on the chest pocket. His hands, Keanu noticed, were large and covered in calluses and old oil stains that no amount of soap would ever completely remove. "You the fellow with the Porsche?" the man asked, his voice matching the gruff tone from the phone. "Yes, that's me," Keanu replied, extending his hand. "Keanu," the old man looked at Keanu's hand for a moment before shaking it firmly. "Frank Miller. Let's have a look before I load her up." Frank walked to the rear of the Porsche, lifted the hood, and leaned in. His movements were deliberate, like someone who had performed the same actions thousands of times over many decades. He didn't speak, just listened to the engine as Keanu tried to start it, watched the way certain parts moved or didn't move, and occasionally reached in to touch something with his fingertips. After a few minutes, he straightened up with a slight grimace, one hand going to his lower back. "Timing chain's gone bad. Might be more, but that's the start of your troubles." He wiped his hands on a red rag pulled from his back pocket. "Not a quick fix. Parts for these old German sports cars take time to get. Might be a week, maybe more." Keanu nodded, accepting the news. "That's fine. Is there a place I can rent a car in town?" Frank let out a short laugh. "Pine Grove's got one stoplight and a population of 800. Nearest car rental is 40 miles back toward Los Angeles. He studied Keanu more carefully. You look familiar. I get that sometimes, Keanu said with a small smile. Frank didn't pursue it. There's a decent inn in town. The Pine Grove Inn. Nothing fancy, but the rooms are clean and Lisa's cooking is worth staying for. Keanu helped Frank secure the Porsche to the tow truck, and then climbed into the passenger seat for the drive to town. The truck's interior was surprisingly clean, with a worn but well-cared-for leather seat and a dashboard free of dust. The only personal touch was a small wooden cross hanging from the rearview mirror. As they drove, Frank remained quiet, focused on the road. Keanu respected the silence, looking out the window as the landscape changed from open highway to small-town America. Pine Grove appeared around a bend, a main street lined with buildings that looked like they belonged in a different era. A hardware store, a diner, a small grocery market, and various other local businesses made up the heart of the town. Frank's garage sat at the edge of the main street, a two-bay building with an office attached to the side. The sign above read Miller's Auto Shop, Esther 1972, in faded red letters. Behind the shop stood a small house, its lights glowing warmly in the now dark evening. After unloading the Porsche into one of the bays, Frank led Keanu into the office to fill out paperwork. The room was a time capsule of automotive history, shelves lined with old car manuals, walls covered in vintage advertising signs, and a glass case displaying model cars of various makes and eras. Behind a simple desk covered in neatly organized papers sat an old leather chair that had clearly molded itself to Frank's form over many years. Need your information and a signature, Frank said, sliding a form across the desk. I'll look closer at the car tomorrow morning. Call you with a full diagnosis and price. Shop opens at 7. As Keanu filled out the form, he noticed Frank studying him. You're that actor, Frank finally said. Not a question, but a statement. The one from those action movies. Keanu nodded with a slight smile. Yes, my granddaughter loves those films. Watches them over and over. Frank's expression didn't change, but his tone softened slightly. She'll be upset she missed meeting you. She's away at college. I'll be here for a while, it seems, Keanu replied. Frank nodded once. Inn's 3 blocks down, can't miss it. Tell Lisa I sent you. He pointed out the window toward the main street. Diner across from the inn serves breakfast at 6 if you're an early riser. Keanu thanked him, shouldered his small overnight bag that he always kept in the car, and headed out. As he walked away from the garage, he heard the sound of tools being organized and the faint melody of classical music starting to play. The unexpected sound made him glance back, seeing through the garage window as Frank moved around the Porsche, gently placing a hand on its hood like he was greeting an old friend. The streets of Pine Grove were quiet, with only a few people out walking. A couple nodded politely as they passed. No one seemed to recognize him, or if they did, they respectfully kept it to themselves. The air smelled of pine trees and something sweet baking from the diner, a welcome change from the city's constant commotion. The Pine Grove Inn was exactly as Frank had described, nothing fancy, but charming in its simplicity. The building was an old Victorian house painted a soft blue with white trim. A sign in the window read "Vacancy" in gentle cursive letters. Inside, the reception area was warmly lit and decorated with local landscape photographs. Behind the desk stood a woman in her early 60s with silver-streaked brown hair pulled back in a practical bun. Welcome to the Pine Grove Inn, she said with a genuine smile. I'm Lisa Miller. How can I help you this evening? Frank sent me, Keanu replied. My car broke down outside of town. Recognition flashed in her eyes, but like Frank, she didn't make a fuss. Ah, you must be the Porsche owner. Frank called to say you might be staying with us. How long will you need a room? A week, possibly longer. We have a room with a view of the garden. Very quiet. Would that suit you? Perfect, thank you. As Lisa checked him in, Keanu felt the tension of the day begin to melt away. There was something refreshing about being in a place where life moved at a different pace, where a broken-down car wasn't a disaster but simply a part of life's journey. What had started as an inconvenience now felt like an unexpected detour, one that might lead somewhere interesting. Tomorrow he would learn more about what was wrong with his car, but for tonight he would rest and adjust to this temporary home away from home. What he didn't know then was how much this unplanned stop would affect him. or how an elderly mechanic with hands shaped by decades of honest work would leave an impression on his life that no Hollywood experience could match. Keanu woke to sunlight streaming through the curtains of his room at the Pine Grove Inn. For a moment he felt disoriented, the unfamiliar ceiling above him a stark reminder that he wasn't in his Los Angeles home. Then the events of the previous day came rushing back. His broken-down Porsche, the small town, and the elderly mechanic with hands that told stories of decades fixing cars. The bed was surprisingly comfortable, and the room had a homey feel with its handmade quilt and simple wooden furniture. Checking his phone, Keanu saw it was just past 6 in the morning. His body was still on film schedule, waking early despite having nowhere to be. After a quick shower, he headed downstairs to find Lisa setting out fresh coffee in the small dining area. The smell of baking filled the air. "Good morning," she greeted him warmly. "You're an early riser. Coffee's fresh, and there's banana bread if you'd like some. Frank mentioned you might want to know the shop opens at 7. "Thank you," Keanu replied, pouring himself a cup. "The coffee smells wonderful." "It's local, roasted just one town over," Lisa said with obvious pride. "Most guests don't realize how many small businesses we have around here. Everyone thinks you need to be in a big city for quality." Keanu took a bite of the banana bread she offered. "This is delicious." "My mother's recipe," Lisa said, a touch of sadness in her voice. "She passed last year at 92. Taught me everything I know about baking." "I'm sorry for your loss," Keanu said sincerely. Lisa nodded in acknowledgement. "Frank and I have been running these businesses for 43 years now. Met in high school, married at 20, and bought these places when we were 25. Everyone thought we were crazy taking on so much debt so young." "You and Frank are married?" Keanu asked, surprised by the connection. "Going on 45 years, Lisa confirmed with a small smile. "We've always kept our businesses separate. He has his garage, I have my inn. Works better that way. We see each other at breakfast and dinner, and that's plenty." She chuckled. "Any more than that and we might drive each other crazy." Keanu smiled at her candor. There was something refreshing about people who spoke plainly about their lives without pretense. After finishing his coffee and declining a second piece of banana bread, Keanu thanked Lisa and headed out toward Frank's garage. The morning air was crisp and the town was beginning to wake up. A few people were opening shops along the main street, and an older man was sweeping the sidewalk in front of the hardware store. The walk gave Keanu time to think. His assistant had rearranged his schedule, postponing meetings and a photo shoot that had been planned for the week. His next filming wasn't for 3 weeks, so at least there was no immediate pressure there. Still, being stuck without a car in a town with no rental options was inconvenient. When he arrived at Miller's auto shop, the large bay door was already open. Inside, Frank was bent over the engine of Keanu's Porsche, the car now up on a lift for better access. The radio played softly in the background, classical music again, a Bach cello suite that seemed at odds with the grease-stained environment, but somehow fit the methodical way Frank worked. Keanu stood quietly for a moment, not wanting to interrupt. Frank's movements were precise and deliberate, his focus complete. Finally, sensing he was being watched, the older man glanced up. "Morning," Frank said with a nod. "Coffee's in the office if you want some." "Already had some at the inn, thank you," Keanu replied, stepping closer to the car. "How's it looking?" Frank straightened up slowly, one hand going to his lower back as he did. "Timing chains definitely shot. That's the main problem. But while I'm in there, noticed your fuel lines are showing wear. Probably smart to replace those too. And your alternator's original. Impressive it's lasted this long, but it's running weak." Keanu nodded, taking in the information. "What's the time frame look like?" "Called my parts supplier this morning. They can get the timing chain by tomorrow. Alternator might take 3 days. Fuel lines I can get locally." Frank wiped his hands on a rag. "Figure 5 days of work, give or take. These old Porsches, you can't rush them." "And the cost?" Keanu asked. Frank walked over to a workbench where a notepad lay open. He picked it up and handed it to Keanu. The page showed a detailed breakdown of parts and labor, with a total at the bottom that was substantial but fair for the work described. "That's assuming no surprises," Frank added. "Old cars like this sometimes hide problems. I find anything else, I'll let you know before I touch it." Keanu appreciated the transparency. "That's fine. Go ahead with everything you've listed." Frank studied him for a moment. "You know, most folks would be asking if there's a quicker way. Calling in specialists from the city. Keanu shrugged. The car's waited this long. A few more days won't hurt. Something that might have been approval flashed in Frank's eyes. All right then. I'll get to work. Is there anything I can help with? Keanu asked, surprising himself with the offer. Frank raised an eyebrow. You know about cars? Not much, Keanu admitted. But I can learn. Frank seemed to consider this. Not today. Today I need to tear down and inspect. Tomorrow maybe. When I'm putting things back together. If you really want to learn, Keanu nodded. I'll check back tomorrow then. As he turned to leave, Frank called after him. Town library's 2 blocks past the inn if you need something to do. Or there's hiking trails that start behind the church. Views are worth the climb. Keanu thanked him for the suggestions and headed out. The idea of a hike appealed to him, a chance to clear his head and stretch his legs after yesterday's long drive and the stress of the breakdown. The hiking trail was easy to find, marked by a simple wooden sign behind the white steepled church at the edge of town. The path climbed steadily through pine forests, occasionally opening up to reveal views of the valley below. Keanu passed only 2 other hikers, an older couple who nodded politely but didn't intrude on his solitude. At the top of the trail, a small clearing offered a panoramic view of Pine Grove and the surrounding countryside. Keanu sat on a fallen log taking in the peaceful scene. There was something grounding about being here, away from the constant buzz of loss. Angeles and the demands of his career. His phone vibrated in his pocket, a text from his agent asking how long he'd be stranded in Nowheresville, and if he wanted a helicopter sent to pick him up. The suggestion made Keanu smile. It would be so easy to call in resources, to throw money at the problem and be back in Los Angeles by dinner time. But something held him back. Maybe it was curiosity about this place and its people. Maybe it was the way Frank had looked at his car, not as a status symbol, but as a piece of engineering worthy of proper care. Whatever it was, Keanu found himself texting back a simple reply. All good here. We'll be back when the car's ready. He spent most of the day exploring the town, finding unexpected treasures, a bookstore with a surprisingly good selection of philosophy texts, a small art gallery featuring local artists, and a cafe where the owner's daughter recognized him immediately, but only asked for an autograph for her mother, who apparently had been a fan since Speed. In the evening, Keanu ate dinner at the diner across from the inn. The place was busy with locals, and he found himself seated at the counter, the only spot available. The woman behind the counter, who introduced herself as Patty, treated him just like any other customer, which he appreciated. Halfway through his meal, a homemade meatloaf that rivaled any he'd had, the door opened, and Frank walked in. The mechanic nodded to several people as he made his way to an empty seat 2 spots down from Keanu. Evening, Frank said with a nod to Keanu. Patty, usual, please. Coming right up. Frank, Patty replied, already pouring a cup of coffee. How's that Porsche coming along? Started the teardown today, Frank answered. German engineering, complicated but beautiful when done right. Patty set a plate in front of Frank, a grilled cheese sandwich and a small bowl of tomato soup. You've been saying that about German cars since I was a kid. Been true that long, too, Frank replied with the ghost of a smile. Keanu watched the exchange with interest. There was an easy familiarity between everyone in the diner, the kind that only comes from years of shared community. Found anything to keep you busy? Frank asked Keanu, surprising him by initiating conversation. Hiked the trail behind the church, Keanu replied. Beautiful views, Frank nodded. My grandfather helped clear that trail back in the 40s. Used to take me up there when I was a boy. He took a bite of his sandwich, chewed thoughtfully. You staying at Lisa's all week, or you got someone coming to get you? I'll stay, Keanu said. It's nice here. Frank studied him for a moment. Most city folks get antsy after a day or two. Nothing much happens in Pine Grove. Sometimes nothing happening is exactly what you need, Keanu replied. Frank seemed to consider this, then gave a single nod, as if Keanu had passed some sort of test. Come by the shop tomorrow around 9 if you're serious about learning something. Wear clothes you don't mind getting dirty. With that, Frank returned his attention to his meal. Keanu did the same, but he felt a small sense of accomplishment at having earned even this small measure of acceptance from the taciturn mechanic. Later that night, as Keanu lay in bed at the inn, He found himself looking forward to the next day with an unexpected sense of anticipation. His phone showed dozens of messages and emails, the outside world continuing its relentless pace. But here in Pine Grove, time seemed to move differently. For the first time in longer than he could remember, Keanu felt no urgency to be anywhere else or do anything else. Tomorrow he would learn about engines from a man who had been fixing them since before he was born. It wasn't in the script he had planned for his life, but sometimes the best moments came from the scenes you never expected to play. True to his word, Keanu showed up at Frank's garage at 9 the next morning. He'd dressed in jeans and an old t-shirt, clothes he wouldn't mind getting dirty. The garage door was open, and classical music, Vivaldi this time, floated out into the morning air. Frank was already at work. Parts of the Porsche's engine laid out in a precise pattern on a clean white cloth beside the car. He looked up as Keanu entered, giving him a quick once-over. "Good, you dressed right," Frank said by way of greeting. He gestured to a small sink in the corner. "Wash your hands first. Oil and grease are part of the job, but we start clean." Keanu followed the instruction, noticing the special soap by the sink that was clearly designed to cut through automotive grime. As he dried his hands on a shop towel, Frank motioned him over to the workbench. "First thing you should know," Frank began, picking up a worn leather-bound notebook, "is that I keep records of every car I work on." He opened the book to reveal neat handwriting detailing repairs, dates, and parts used. "Started this in '72 when I opened the shop. This is book number 23. He set the notebook down and picked up a timing chain from the bench. "This is what failed in your car. See how the links are stretched and worn? Metal fatigue. Happens to everything eventually." Keanu studied the part with genuine interest. "How often should it be replaced?" "Factory says every 60,000 miles, but that's if you drive it hard." Frank turned the chain in his hands. "This one's done well over 100,000, I'd guess. Someone took good care of this engine. I bought it from a collector about 10 years ago," Keanu explained. "He said it had been restored, but I don't know the full history." Frank nodded. "Well, she's got stories to tell, that's for sure." He laid the timing chain down and pointed to the parts on the cloth. "Today we're going to clean everything, inspect it all, and then start putting it back together with the new parts. I'll show you how it all fits, how the heart of your car works." What followed was a masterclass in mechanics. Frank didn't just show Keanu what to do. He explained why each part was designed the way it was, how it functioned within the system, and what could go wrong. His weathered hands moved with precision and care, treating each component with respect. "People think mechanics just swap parts," Frank said as they worked. "But that's not fixing, that's replacing. Real fixing is understanding why something failed and addressing the root cause." Keanu found himself engrossed in the work. There was something deeply satisfying about understanding how things functioned, about seeing the logical connections between cause and effect. Frank was a patient teacher, never showing frustration when Keanu asked questions or needed something explained again. Around noon, Frank straightened up and stretched his back. "Lunch break," he announced. "Shop closes for an hour every day. Lisa makes sandwiches." As if on cue, the side door opened and Lisa walked in carrying a small cooler. "Thought you might be hungry," she said, smiling at both men. "Turkey and Swiss for Frank, and I made an extra for you, Keanu, if you'd like." "Thank you," Keanu said, realizing he was actually quite hungry. "That's very kind." Lisa set the cooler on a clean part of the workbench. "How's the lesson going?" Frank wiped his hands on a shop towel. "He listens well. Asks good questions." Coming from Frank, Keanu sensed this was high praise. Lisa seemed to think so too, giving Keanu an approving nod. "There's iced tea in there too," she said, heading back toward the door. "Frank, don't forget we're having dinner at Ron and Judy's tonight." After she left, the two men sat on stools by the workbench, eating their sandwiches. The silence was comfortable, broken only by the continuing classical music from the old radio in the corner. "You always listen to classical?" Keanu asked after a while. Frank nodded. "Helps me think. My father played violin in an orchestra before the war. Not professionally, but he was good." He took a sip of tea. "He'd practice in our garage while fixing our family car. Said music and mechanics both required the same things: patience, precision, and passion." "Sounds like a wise man," Keanu remarked. "He was," Frank agreed, a distant look in his eyes. "Served in Korea. Came back changed like most who see combat. But he still played his violin. still fixed cars. Said those things kept him anchored when memories tried to pull him away. Keanu remained quiet, sensing there was more to come if he didn't interrupt. I served too. Vietnam. Frank said it matter-of-factly without drama. 2 tours as a mechanic keeping helicopters flying. Came back in '71. Started this place a year later with money I'd saved and a loan from my father. He looked around the garage with evident pride. Been here ever since. Seen cars change, seen the town change. Some things get better, some worse. That's life. After lunch, they returned to work on the Porsche. As the afternoon progressed, Frank began sharing more stories from his life. He told Keanu about meeting Lisa in high school, about their wedding where his mother cried and his father played the violin, about the birth of their 3 children and the heartbreak when their middle child, a son, died in a car accident at 19. That nearly broke us, Frank said quietly as he carefully installed the new alternator. Lisa couldn't even look at cars for a year. Couldn't stand to hear an engine start. I almost sold the shop. What changed? Keanu asked softly. Frank's hands paused for a moment. Time helps. Not heals. Nothing heals that kind of wound completely. But time helps you learn to live with it. He resumed his work. And purpose. Having something meaningful to do. For me it was this place. For Lisa it was the inn. He tightened a bolt with careful precision. People in town helped too. Brought food. Watched the other kids when we couldn't function, just sat with us sometimes. Small towns. We take care of our own. As the afternoon wore on, Keanu found himself helping more, his hands becoming familiar with the tools and parts under Frank's guidance. The work was engrossing, requiring complete focus, and Keanu found it oddly freeing to concentrate on something so concrete and immediate. You're good with your hands, Frank observed as Keanu successfully installed a small component. Steady, patient. I've always enjoyed making things, Keanu replied. Building, creating. There's a satisfaction in seeing something take shape. Frank nodded. That's the heart of it. Creation over destruction. Fixing over replacing. Nowadays, everything's disposable. Phones, appliances, even relationships sometimes. People don't know how to repair anymore, they just throw away and buy new. He wiped his hands on a rag. But some things are worth fixing, worth the time and effort to make right again. This car of yours, it's got decades more life in it if treated properly. At 5 o'clock, Frank began cleaning up the workspace, putting tools away with the same care he'd shown working on the car. We made good progress today, he told Keanu. Tomorrow we'll continue with the fuel lines, then start testing systems. If you want to come back, that is. I'd like that, Keanu said, realizing he genuinely meant it. As they were finishing the cleanup, the side door opened again, and a young man in his early 20s walked in. He was tall and lanky with dark hair cut short, wearing jeans and a t-shirt similar to Keanu's. Hey, Mr. Miller, the young man called out, then stopped short when he saw Keanu. Oh, sorry, didn't know you had a customer. Come on in, Bobby, Frank said. This is Keanu. His Porsche is our project this week. Keanu, this is Bobby Chen. He works here part-time while taking classes at the community college. Bobby's eyes widened slightly as he recognized Keanu, but to his credit, he simply extended his hand. Nice to meet you, sir. Just Keanu is fine, he replied, shaking the young man's hand. You're studying mechanics? Engineering, Bobby replied. Mr. Miller's been teaching me practical applications. Textbooks are one thing, but actually working with your hands. Frank made a dismissive gesture, but Keanu could see he was pleased by the comment. Bobby's got a natural talent. Going to design cars someday, not just fix them. Bobby looked embarrassed but proud of the praise. I just came by to pick up the manual you said I could borrow, Mr. Miller. Frank walked to a shelf of books and pulled down a thick technical manual. Chapter 7 has what you need for your project. Take good care of it. They don't print these anymore. After Bobby left with the book and a respectful nod to both men, Frank locked up the tools and turned off the radio. He's a good kid, Frank said. Smart. Reminds me of my son sometimes. The simple statement contained volumes of emotion, and Keanu felt honored that Frank had shared something so personal with him. As they walked out of the garage, Frank turned to lock the door. Lisa says there's a town council meeting tonight at the community center. They're showing old movies after. Tonight it's The Day the Earth Stood Still, the original from '51, not that remake. You might enjoy it if you've got nothing better to do. Keanu smiled. Sounds perfect, actually. As he walked back to the inn to clean up before dinner, Keanu reflected on the day. He'd come to learn about cars but had received much more: stories, wisdom, and glimpses into a life built on principles of care and craftsmanship. His phone buzzed with messages from his agent, his assistant, friends in LA wondering when he'd be back. The outside world continued its frantic pace, but here in Pine Grove, working with his hands alongside a man who measured his life in engines fixed and people helped, Keanu had found something he hadn't realized he was missing: a connection to something real, something that couldn't be faked or enhanced with special effects. He thought about what Frank had said about things worth fixing, worth the time and effort to make right again. Perhaps that applied to more than just cars. By the fourth day of his stay in Pine Grove, Keanu had fallen into a comfortable routine. Mornings began with breakfast at the inn, where Lisa would share town news while serving her homemade pastries. Then he would head to Frank's garage, where they would work on the Porsche until lunch. Afternoons were split between more work on the car and exploring the town. Evenings were spent at the diner or attending whatever community event was happening that night. The town movie night had been surprisingly enjoyable. About 30 people had gathered in the community center, sitting on folding chairs and sharing homemade popcorn as they watched the sci-fi classic on a pull-down screen. No one made a fuss about Keanu's presence, though he'd caught a few excited whispers from teenagers in the back row. What struck him most was how the townspeople discussed the film afterward, thoughtfully analyzing themes of fear, communication, and humanity's place in the universe. It wasn't the surface-level conversation he sometimes encountered at Hollywood parties, but genuine engagement with ideas. This morning, as Keanu walked into the garage, he found Frank in conversation with an elderly woman. She was small and frail, with snow-white hair and glasses that magnified her eyes, making her look slightly owl-like. A worn blue sedan that had to be at least 20 years old was parked in the second bay. "Morning." Frank nodded to Keanu, then turned back to the woman. "I'll have it done by this afternoon, Mrs. Porter. Don't worry about the cost. We'll figure something out like we always do." "You're too good to me, Frank," the woman said, patting his arm. "I don't know what I'd do without you keeping that old car running." "Car's got plenty of life left," Frank replied. "Just needs a little attention now and then." After Mrs. Porter left, driven home by a neighbor who had been waiting outside, Keanu and Frank returned to work on the Porsche. The new timing chain was installed, and today they were focusing on the fuel lines. "Mrs. Porter, she's been a customer a long time?" Keanu asked as they worked. Frank nodded. "Since '75, her husband brought their car in back then. After he passed in '98, she kept coming. Taught herself to drive at 67 years old because she didn't want to be dependent on anyone." He reached for a wrench. "Her Social Security doesn't go far. I keep her car running. She knits Lisa a sweater every Christmas. Fair trade." Keanu thought about this as they worked. He'd noticed over the past few days that Frank often mentioned customers in terms of their history, not just with their cars, but with the town, with his shop, with his family. People weren't just customers to him. They were relationships built over decades. Around mid-morning, Bobby arrived earlier than his usual afternoon shift. "Mr. Miller, I finished that design project," he said excitedly, holding a roll of paper. "Would you mind taking a look?" Frank wiped his hands and gestured to the workbench. "Let's see it." Bobby unrolled the paper, revealing detailed engineering drawings of what appeared to be a modified engine design. Keanu, curious, moved closer to look. "It's a hybrid system," Bobby explained. "Takes a classic engine like this Porsche's, but adds modern efficiency elements without losing the original character or requiring major modifications to the chassis." Frank studied the drawings with serious concentration, occasionally asking questions about specific aspects of the design. Bobby answered confidently, though with clear respect for Frank's opinion. Keanu watched the exchange with interest. It was obvious that Frank was more than just an employer to Bobby. He was a mentor, someone whose approval mattered deeply. "It's good work," Frank finally said, looking up from the drawings. "You've thought through the practical aspects, not just the theoretical." "That's rare in young engineers," Bobby beamed at the praise. "I was hoping to enter it in the state engineering competition next month." "You should," Frank agreed. "Just strengthen this mounting bracket here. It'll face more vibration than you're accounting for." He pointed to a section of the drawing. As Bobby rolled up his drawings, Frank introduced him properly to Keanu. Bobby's grandfather was my first employee when I opened this place. 3 generations of his family have worked in this garage. Bobby looked slightly embarrassed. My grandfather still talks about those days. Says Mr. Miller was the toughest boss, but taught him everything worth knowing about cars and people. Frank made a dismissive gesture but couldn't completely hide his pleased expression. Your grandfather was a natural mechanic. Your father too, before he decided to become a doctor. Breaking the family tradition, Bobby said with a grin, though Dad still changes his own oil. Says he can't trust anyone else to do it right after learning from you. After Bobby left for his classes, promising to return in the afternoon, Frank and Keanu resumed work on the Porsche. You've made quite an impact on this town, Keanu observed. Frank focused on tightening a connection. Been here a long time, that's all. Any job you do for 50 years, you leave some mark. It's more than that, Keanu persisted. The way people talk about you, it's with real respect. Frank was quiet for a moment. In a small town, your reputation is everything. Can't hide behind corporate policies or fancy advertising. People know if you do honest work or if you cut corners. Word gets around. They worked in comfortable silence for a while before Frank spoke again. When I came back from Vietnam, I was angry. Saw too much over there. Did things I'm not proud of. He kept his eyes on his work as he spoke. Started this garage because machines made sense when people didn't. You fix what's broken, replace what's worn out, and things work again. Simple. He reached for another tool. But people kept bringing their problems along with their cars. Single mother who couldn't afford repairs but needed her car to get to work. Farmer whose tractor broke during harvest season. Teenager who crashed his dad's car and was scared to tell him. Frank glanced at Keanu. Found myself fixing more than just engines, letting people pay when they could. Hiring boys who needed direction. Teaching anyone who wanted to learn. He shrugged slightly. Wasn't trying to make an impact. Just seemed like the right thing to do. The side door opened and a middle-aged woman walked in carrying a foil-covered plate. Frank Miller. You missed the potluck at church on Sunday, so I brought you some of my apple pie. Oh, she stopped, noticing Keanu. I didn't realize you had company. It's all right, Judy, Frank said. This is Keanu. He's learning about engines while I fix his car. Keanu, this is Judy Thompson, best pie baker in 3 counties and president of our town council. Judy smiled at Keanu. So you're the one everyone's talking about. Our little town doesn't get many famous visitors. The pie looks delicious, Keanu said, deflecting attention from himself. Well, there's plenty for both of you, Judy said, setting the plate on a clear spot on the workbench. Frank, don't forget the council needs your input on the bridge repair budget. And Lisa mentioned your granddaughter's coming home from college this weekend. Tell her to stop by the library. We've got those books she was asking about. After Judy left, Frank cut the pie with a clean pocket knife, serving a piece to Keanu on a shop towel. Town's telegraph system, he said wryly. News travels fast here. The pie was indeed excellent, sweet apples with just the right amount of cinnamon and a flaky crust that somehow remained intact despite their improvised eating arrangements. Your granddaughter's visiting? Keanu asked between bites. Frank nodded. Grace, she's at Berkeley studying environmental science. Smart kid. Wants to save the world. There was unmistakable pride in his voice. She's the one who likes your movies. In the afternoon, more visitors arrived at the garage. Bobby returned for his shift, and shortly after, an older man with work-worn hands stopped by to ask Frank's advice about a tractor problem. A young mother with 2 children dropped off cookies as thanks for Frank fixing her minivan the previous week. Each person greeted Frank with obvious respect and left with something more than just mechanical advice. They left with the certainty that their problems mattered to someone. Keanu found himself drawn into these interactions. The young children stared at him wide-eyed when their mother whispered who he was, but they were more interested in the shiny tools and the inside parts of the cars than in his celebrity. Bobby showed him shortcuts for certain tasks, his initial shyness giving way to enthusiasm for sharing knowledge. By evening, when they closed up the garage, Keanu felt a sense of accomplishment that went beyond the progress they'd made on the Porsche. He had been welcomed, however briefly, into the web of connections that made up this community. Diners serving meatloaf tonight, Frank said as they washed up. Town tradition on Thursdays. You might want to get there early, it sells out. Would you like to join me? Keanu asked. I'd enjoy the company. Frank seemed surprised by the invitation but nodded. Let me call Lisa. She's having dinner with her quilting group, but I should check. At the diner, they were seated at a booth rather than the counter. Patty greeted them with a knowing smile, as if seeing them together made perfect sense. "The usual, Frank?" she asked, pouring coffee without waiting for an answer. "And for our guest?" "The meatloaf, please," Keanu said. "Frank recommends it highly." "Smart man," Patty replied with a wink. As they waited for their food, Keanu noticed how many people stopped by their table to say hello to Frank. Some just nodded, others paused for brief conversations. What struck him was how Frank knew something personal about each of them, asking about a son in college, a recent surgery, a new grandchild. "You know everyone in town," Keanu observed after a particularly long procession of well-wishers. Frank shrugged. "Small town. Hard not to." "It's more than that," Keanu pressed. "You really listen to people. Remember details about their lives." Frank was quiet for a moment. "My father taught me that. Said you can fix a man's car, but if you don't know what he needs it for, really needs it for, you're just a parts replacer, not a mechanic." He sipped his coffee. "That young woman who just left? Jenny Rivera. Her father was my friend in high school. Died in Vietnam. I helped her mother keep their car running when money was tight. Now Jenny brings her own cars to me. Her son Bobby works in my shop. Life goes in circles like that." Their food arrived, generous portions of meatloaf with mashed potatoes and green beans. It was simple fare but expertly prepared, the kind of meal that satisfied something deeper than hunger. As they ate, Keanu found himself sharing stories from his own life, his early struggles as an actor, the joy of motorcycle rides along empty highways, his love of bass guitar and the peace he found in music. Frank listened with the same attention he gave to engines, asking occasional questions that showed he was truly hearing what Keanu was saying. By the time they finished their meal, Keanu realized he'd shared more about himself in one dinner than he sometimes did during months of working on a film. There was something about Frank's straightforward presence that invited honesty. Walking back to the inn afterward, Keanu felt a sense of connection to this place and its people that he hadn't expected when his car broke down just days ago. Tomorrow, according to Frank, the Porsche would be ready. His time in Pine Grove was coming to an end. As he climbed the stairs to his room, Keanu wondered if it was possible to take something of this place with him when he left. Not just the memories or the mechanical knowledge, but the sense of belonging to something real and rooted that had nothing to do with fame or fortune. On the morning of the 7th day, Keanu woke with mixed feelings. According to Frank, the Porsche would be ready by noon. His unexpected stay in Pine Grove was coming to an end, and he was surprised by the tinge of sadness that accompanied the thought. After breakfast, he packed his small overnight bag and settled his bill with Lisa, who refused to charge him for the last night. "Consider it our thank you for being such a pleasant guest," she said warmly. "Most folks who get stranded here are counting the minutes until they can leave. You made yourself part of things." "It's been a pleasure," Keanu replied sincerely. "I've learned a lot this week," Lisa smiled knowingly. "From Frank, you mean?" "He doesn't open up to many people, you know. Talks more with engines than with humans most days. He's been very generous with his knowledge," Keanu said. "And with his stories, from what I hear," Lisa added. "That's rare. Frank doesn't share the Vietnam stuff with just anyone. Or talk about our son." Keanu was quiet for a moment. "I'm honored he felt comfortable enough to share those things with me." Lisa studied him thoughtfully. "You're a good listener. That's rare these days, especially from someone in your position. People probably talk at you all the time without really wanting to hear what you have to say back." The observation was surprisingly insightful, and Keanu nodded in acknowledgement. "Your husband's a good listener too." "That he is," Lisa agreed. "Why do you think I've stayed married to him for 45 years? She chuckled. "That, and he still makes my heart skip when he walks into a room, even with all that gray hair and those work-worn hands." After saying goodbye to Lisa, Keanu walked to the garage for the last time. The door was open as usual, but instead of classical music, he heard voices inside. Frank was speaking to someone, his tone more serious than Keanu had heard all week. "You need to tell him, Bobby," Frank was saying. "Keeping it secret isn't helping anyone." "I know," Bobby's voice replied. It changes everything. For everyone." Keanu hesitated, not wanting to interrupt what was clearly a private conversation. He was about to step away when Frank called out, "That you, Keanu?" Come on in. Entering the garage, Keanu found Frank and Bobby standing beside the Porsche. The car looked immaculate, its engine compartment clean and organized, the exterior polished to a high shine. "She's all ready," Frank said, wiping his hands on a shop towel. "Purrs like a kitten but roars when you need it to." Bobby nodded in agreement but seemed distracted. After a moment of awkward silence, he excused himself. "I need to get some paperwork from the office. Back in a minute." When Bobby had gone, Frank sighed heavily. "That boy's got a weight on his shoulders. Anything I can help with?" Keanu asked. Frank shook his head. "Family matter. He needs to handle it himself." He gestured to the car. "Want to take her for a test drive before you head out? Make sure everything's to your satisfaction." Keanu nodded, and they both got into the Porsche. The engine started immediately, the sound smooth and powerful. As they drove through town and onto the highway, Keanu could feel the difference in the car's performance. More responsive, more alive somehow. "You've done amazing work," he told Frank. "It feels better than when I bought it." Frank nodded in satisfaction. "Should do." Replaced more than just the timing chain. Did a full tune-up, adjusted the valves, balanced the carburetors. She'll run another 50 years with proper maintenance. After a few miles, they turned back toward town. As they drove, Frank pointed out landmarks. The farm where he'd grown up, the spot where the town's original garage had stood before he built his own, the field where the community gathered for 4th of July fireworks every year. When they returned to the garage, Bobby was waiting with paperwork on a clipboard. "Everything's ready, Mr. Miller." Frank took the clipboard and handed it to Keanu. "Final invoice. Parts and labor, just as we discussed." Keanu looked at the total. It was exactly as Frank had estimated at the beginning, despite the additional work he knew had been done. When he pointed this out, Frank shrugged. "I quoted you a job. Extra bits were on me." He held up a hand when Keanu began to protest. "That's how I do business. Always have." Keanu wrote a check for the amount, then added a separate check with a generous tip. "For Bobby's college fund," he said quietly to Frank. No arguments. Frank studied him for a moment, then nodded once in acceptance. As Keanu prepared to leave, several townspeople stopped by to say goodbye. Patty from the diner brought a bag of homemade cookies for the road. Judy from the town council delivered a Pine Grove coffee mug, "So you'll remember us in Hollywood." Even Mrs. Porter hobbled in, leaning on a cane to thank him for being so kind to our Frank. The attention embarrassed Keanu somewhat, but he was touched by the genuine warmth of these people, who had so quickly accepted him into their community. It was so different from the calculated friendliness he often encountered in his professional world, where relationships frequently came with hidden agendas or expectations. As the well-wishers departed, Bobby approached Keanu with a hesitant expression. "Mr. Reeves, could I speak with you for a moment?" "In private?" Surprised, Keanu followed Bobby to the office, where the young man closed the door and took a deep breath. "I didn't know how to tell you this earlier," Bobby began. "But Mr. Miller, Frank, he's been sick. Really sick. Cancer. Doctors gave him 6 months to a year, and that was 4 months ago." The news hit Keanu like a physical blow. "I had no idea." "He seems so strong?" "Yeah, he is." Bobby swallowed hard. "He doesn't want people feeling sorry for him. Only Lisa and I know. And his doctors, of course. He made us promise not to tell anyone in town yet." "Why are you telling me?" Keanu asked gently. Bobby looked down at his hands. "Because I'm supposed to take over the garage when he can't work anymore. He's been teaching me everything he knows, but I'm not ready. There's so much more to learn from him." The young man's voice cracked slightly. "And because he respects you. In just a week, you've connected with him in a way most people don't. He told me last night that you understand what it means to create something that lasts." Keanu was quiet, processing the revelation. It explained so much. The depth of Frank's reflections on life, his emphasis on passing knowledge to Bobby, the way he spoke about leaving a mark on the world. "What can I do?" Keanu asked finally. "Nothing for Frank directly. He'd hate knowing I told you." Bobby straightened his shoulders. "But I could use help. This garage is more than just a business. It's the heart of this town in some ways. People depend on it, on us, and I don't want to let them down when Frank can't be here anymore." Keanu understood what Bobby was asking. "You need resources to keep the garage going. To honor Frank's legacy." Bobby nodded. "I've got the passion and some of the knowledge. What I don't have is business experience or enough capital to modernize some of the equipment. Frank's been running this place on determination and duct tape for years. I'll help, Keanu said without hesitation. Whatever you need. Relief washed over Bobby's face. Thank you. That would mean everything to Frank, even if he never knows about it. When they returned to the main garage area, Frank was wiping down the Porsche one last time, his movements as precise and careful as they had been all week. Watching him, Keanu saw not just a mechanic, but a man who had built his life around principles of care, quality, and service to others. She's ready for the road, Frank said, stepping back from the car. Take good care of her? I will, Keanu promised. Knowing they were talking about more than just the Porsche, as he prepared to leave, Keanu extended his hand to Frank. The older man took it in a firm grip. Thank you, Keanu said simply, for everything. Frank nodded, his expression softening slightly. You're welcome back anytime. Might even put you to work again. Keanu smiled. I'd like that. As he drove away from Pine Grove, the Porsche running better than it had in years, Keanu's mind was already forming a plan. A foundation for small-town automotive apprenticeships, funding for Bobby to finish his engineering degree while keeping the garage operating, resources for Lisa to expand the inn if she wanted to. He would do it quietly, respecting Frank's pride and privacy. It wouldn't be charity, but investment in the future of craftsmanship and community that Frank valued so highly. 3 months later, Keanu sat in an interview chair, promoting his latest film. The interviewer, a polished woman with practiced enthusiasm, asked the usual questions about the movie, his co-stars, upcoming projects. Then she leaned forward with a conspiratorial smile. Now, there's been some buzz about a small town you were spotted in earlier this year. Something about your car breaking down? Fans are calling it your secret Heartland tour. Care to comment? Keanu smiled slightly. Sometimes the unexpected detours are the most meaningful parts of the journey. And what did you take away from that experience? The interviewer pressed. Keanu thought of Frank, his weathered hands working with precision on the Porsche's engine, his quiet wisdom, his commitment to quality and service. He thought of the community that had welcomed a stranger without fanfare or expectation. I learned that true craftsmanship isn't just about the things we make, he replied. It's about the care we put into making them, and the people whose lives they touch. Sometimes the most valuable work happens in places far from the spotlight. What he didn't say was that he'd already been back to Pine Grove twice, that he'd sat with Frank in the garage, learning more about engines and life, that he'd attended a town council meeting where funding had mysteriously appeared for a local technical education program, that Bobby was now enrolled in an advanced engineering course while working at the garage full-time. He didn't mention that Frank had started recording his knowledge, his methods, his stories, his philosophy of mechanics and life, in a series of videos that would preserve his wisdom long after he was gone, and he certainly didn't share that. He'd found something in that small town that had eluded him in Hollywood, a sense of genuine connection, of work that mattered in an immediate and tangible way, of community built on mutual respect rather than status or advantage. Some revelations Keanu had learned from Frank were meant to be lived rather than talked about. Like a perfectly tuned engine, their true value was in the journey they made possible.